I am Jennifer Brooks, 29 years old, and even though I run a fintech company worth billions, I still take the bus to work. My parents never got why I choose to live this way. Simple, no flash. Especially at our annual family dinner where I roll up in jeans and they show up dripping in designer labels. That night my sister mocked me right to my face. Still taking the bus, like it was the punchline to some joke. I shrugged it off, but then my mom's eyes locked on my wrist. She froze, staring at the watch. "That's a $8 million limited edition," she whispered, her voice trailing off. The whole room went dead silent. Forks paused mid-air, conversations cut short. I just smiled and said, "Oh, this piece of junk." That flick of my wrist shut them all up and turned the night upside down. Before I dive into how it all unfolded, I'm curious. What time is it where you're listening, and which city are you in? It makes me happy to see how far these stories travel. Hit like if you've ever dealt with family judgment, and subscribe for more raw tales like this. Growing up as the daughter of Robert and Stephanie Brooks meant elite private schools in McLean, Virginia weekends, sailing on Chesapeake Bay, and every luxury a kid could dream of. My father started his logistics firm from a single truck, scaling it into a powerhouse through relentless deals and sharp instincts. My mother hailed from a family with deep roots in real estate, her side owning prime properties around Washington, D.C. They handed me every advantage, but they also drilled in the idea of sticking to the family playbook. My sister Kayla was all in on that, coasting on connections, flashing the perks. But I craved something independent. After graduating from Georgetown's business school, I shocked them by passing on a cushy executive spot at Dad's company. Instead, I grabbed an entry-level role at a scrappy fintech startup downtown. Dad scratched his head but backed me, saying it built character. Mom flipped out, convinced I was squandering my education on some pipe dream. She sat me down one evening, her voice tight. "Jennifer, we've given you the world. Why throw it away for uncertainty?" I explained it was about forging my path, but she shook her head, worried I'd end up regretting it. Kayla was worse. She called me right after, laughing. "You could be cruising in a BMW by summer if you joined Dad," she snickered. "But sure, go slave away coding budgets for geeks who'll tank before Christmas." I brushed it off, telling her success wasn't about wheels. She rolled her eyes like I'd lost it, then texted memes about broke entrepreneurs for weeks. The startup was a whirlwind. High energy, packed with sharp minds crafting apps to democratize finance for average folks. I dove in, learning fast, starting with data entry, but quickly moving to analysis. Days blurred into nights, debugging algorithms that helped everyday people track investments without big bank fees. The team was diverse, from coders fresh out of MIT to veterans who'd seen booms and busts. I handled client demos, tweaking features based on real feedback from small investors struggling with market volatility. One pitch stood out. We landed a mid-size credit union by showing how our tool cut their fraud detection time in half. That win boosted morale. Celebrations were simple, just team lunches at a local deli. Promotions came quick. By month 18, I was overseeing the entire user experience team. Challenges popped up constantly. Competitors poaching talent, regulatory hurdles from DC that forced rewrites of compliance code. But the wins fueled me, like when our beta app helped a retiree spot a scam before losing savings. Users sent thank you notes, which I pinned on my desk as reminders. Kayla kept texting snide comments about my starving artist phase, comparing it to her cushy role in Mom's real estate office. "Enjoy your bus rides while I close deals from the office jacuzzi," she'd say. I ignored them, focusing on the grind. Mom called weekly, probing if I was ready to come home, to stability, her tone mixing concern and frustration. "Your father built this for you girls," she'd remind me. Dad was quieter, slipping in questions about my quarterly reports during holidays, his eyes showing quiet pride when I shared small victories. The startup's breakthrough came with a partnership that boosted our user base tenfold. I poured everything into it, skipping social events, eating ramen in my cramped DC apartment to save for prototypes. That environment sharpened me, taught negotiation under pressure, pivoting when features flopped in user tests. By year 2, I was negotiating vendor contracts that saved us thousands monthly. The office buzzed with innovation. Late nights debating AI ethics over cold pizza became routine. One colleague's idea for blockchain integration sparked our next big update, which I led from concept to launch. Time flew, and soon I was presenting at fintech conferences in Baltimore, drawing nods from industry pros and even a few investor inquiries. Kayla visited once, eyeing my basic setup with pity during a rare lunch. "This is your life now, cubicles and coffee runs," she asked, but I saw envy in her dependence on family handouts. She'd never closed a deal without Dad's network. Mom's letters hinted at disappointment, often including clippings of secure jobs, but Dad's occasional emails praised my independence like, "Keep pushing, kid. That's how I started." The startup hit a rough patch with funding dips after a market dip, but we bounced back by securing a grant from a DC accelerator focused on financial inclusion. My role expanded to strategy, where I mapped out expansion to mobile-first tools for underserved communities. Success felt tangible. Users emailing thanks for simplifying taxes during filing season, or how our alerts prevented overdrafts for low-income families. Kayla's jabs faded as I tuned them out, but family dinners still carried that undercurrent of judgment with subtle digs about my hobby job. The path wasn't easy. I missed family vacations to Chesapeake Bay, where Kayla would post photos of yacht parties, but the autonomy was addictive. Looking back, that choice set the stage for everything, proving I could stand alone. But it was there, amid the chaos of code and clients, that I crossed paths with someone who redefined it all. A mentor who opened my eyes to what true achievement meant. That's where I met David Lawson, a 62-year-old seasoned investor who'd backed countless fintech ventures. David stepped in as an advisor during a rocky phase when the startup was hemorrhaging cash and our core app was glitching under load. He wasn't flashy, drove a beat-up Honda Civic, rotated the same few polo shirts, and lived in a modest condo in Alexandria, despite his billions from early bets on payment platforms. While Dad had shown me the ropes of traditional business, David revealed the fintech grind, how to navigate volatile markets, secure seed funding amid skepticism, and build scalable models that actually helped people. He was sharp, generous with time, and utterly indifferent to status markers, even though he'd launched firms now valued in the tens of billions. "Genuine wealth stays under the radar, Jennifer," he said during our first coffee chat. "The second you parade it, you've lost sight of why you started." His words hit hard. I started applying them immediately, cutting unnecessary expenses and focusing on user impact over hype. When the startup got acquired by a major bank for a hefty sum 2 years in, I funneled my payout straight into my own venture, Lawson Finance Solutions, named in his honor as a nod to his guidance. He was moved by it, wiring the first investment without hesitation and taking a board seat. Those initial months were brutal. 18-hour shifts debugging code, crashing on a futon in my DC studio, reinvesting every dollar into server upgrades and talent hires. We developed an algorithm-driven platform that empowered everyday users to outsmart big institutions with personalized financial insights, like predicting credit score dips or optimizing retirement plans. Early pitches bombed. Investors laughed off our focus on underserved markets, saying small users didn't pay enough. Cash dwindled, forcing tough calls like delaying salaries. Through it, David was my anchor. calming jittery backers with data projections reminding me of my core vision when doubt crept in. He'd drop by unannounced with burgers and tales of his own flops, like the payment app that crashed during a demo for venture capitalists. "Failure's just data," he'd say, helping me refine our pitch deck overnight. On my 26th birthday, after a quarter where we finally turned a profit corner, despite bugs, he handed me a small velvet box at our office. "This one's been through my wars, 3 startups, a recession, and a lawsuit that nearly broke me," he explained. Inside was his watch, understated precise, from a limited series he'd designed back before fintech swallowed his life. I'd read about it in profiles, but underestimated its rarity. "David, this is insane. I can't take it," I protested. He waved me off with a laugh. "It might outvalue your company today, but give it time." He clasped it on my wrist himself. "Wear it when the world questions your worth. It's a reminder of yours." 3 months later, David suffered a sudden stroke and passed. The news gutted me. He'd been more than a mentor, a friend who'd believed when others scoffed. The watch became my talisman, worn daily as I steered the company forward without his steady input. In the years since Lawson Finance Solutions skyrocketed, landing enterprise clients like regional banks needing fraud tools, opening branches in New York and abroad, earning spots in tech mags and on under 30 lists. Acquisition bids rolled in weekly, but I turned them down to keep control, all while sticking to David's ethos: no extravagance. I upgraded my studio to a 1-bed, but kept the bus commute avoiding spotlights at industry galas. My family knew bits, that I'd launched something, but I dodged details at gatherings, letting Kayla ramble about her latest closing or Ryan boast his stock picks. They assumed it was still struggling. Mom sent care packages with practical gifts like gift cards for nicer clothes. Dad checked public filings occasionally, his calls growing curious about revenue spikes he spotted. Uncle James' dad's competitive brother, who'd married into finance clout, would probe casually, but I kept responses vague. The annual Brooks family dinner loomed as a ritual at my parents' sprawling estate in McLean, a colonial-style home with views of the Potomac often featured in local lifestyle spreads. Uncle James always amped the rivalry, leveraging his wife's connections for high-roller deals. His son Ryan embodied that, measuring life by portfolio gains and club memberships. As I prepped for this year's event, David's voice echoed in my head about letting judgment slide. With the watch secure on my wrist, I headed into what I thought would be another night of enduring barbs. But that simple accessory was about to ignite everything. The annual Brooks family dinner was a spectacle held at my parents' sprawling colonial estate in McLean, Virginia, with its manicured lawns and Potomac River views that screamed old money. Dad's logistics empire and Mom's real estate legacy had turned the place into a local legend featured in DC lifestyle magazines for its historic charm. Uncle James' dad's younger brother always brought a competitive edge, having married into wealth through Aunt Heather's banking family and climbing to a corner office in a top DC hedge fund. Their son Ryan lived for status his life, a parade of tailored suits and insider trading tips. As I got ready for this year's dinner, David's words about ignoring shallow judgments echoed in my mind, steadying my nerves. I chose my usual outfit, dark jeans, a plain navy sweater, minimal makeup, and his watch its subtle weight grounding me. I took the bus from my DC apartment to a nearby stop, then an Uber for the final stretch to McLean, avoiding the hassle of parking in their crowded driveway. The driver, a chatty guy named Marco, raised an eyebrow as we rolled through the estate's wrought iron gates. "Fancy spot?" he said, eyeing the perfectly trimmed hedges lining the long drive. I nodded, feeling the familiar mix of nostalgia for childhood summers here and unease at the excess. The house loomed ahead, its brick facade glowing under dusk light columns framing the entrance like a movie set. "Just drop me here," I told Marco as we hit the circular drive, already packed with a showroom of luxury cars. Kayla's sleek black SUV sat angled to catch attention next to Uncle James's Cadillac Escalade, Ryan's Porsche gleaming beside it, and a few others from extended family, all screaming wealth. My Uber, a standard Toyota Corolla, stuck out like a sore thumb as it pulled up to the grand double doors. I thanked Marco, tipped generously through the app, and stepped into the crisp Virginia evening. From a window above, I caught Kayla watching her smirk, obvious, even from a distance, likely noting my budget arrival. Before I could knock, the doors swung open, revealing Carlos, the family's longtime butler, his crisp uniform softened by a warm smile. "Miss Jennifer, good to see you," he said, his voice carrying genuine kindness. I smiled back, asking, "How's Elena and the kids, Carlos?" His face lit up. "Elena's good, and Juan just got into UVA, engineering thanks to your essay tips last summer." I grinned, thrilled for his son. "That's amazing. First in the family, right?" He nodded proudly, ushering me into the grand foyer with its polished marble floors and chandelier casting soft light. Voices and soft jazz spilled from the dining hall, the air thick with the scent of roasted herbs. I took a deep breath, bracing for the usual scrutiny. Mom spotted me first. Stephanie Brooks' early 60s stood poised in a tailored emerald dress that cost more than my rent. Her blonde hair swept into an elegant updo. She excused herself from chatting with Aunt Heather and glided over, her smile tight. "Jennifer, darling," she said, air kissing my cheeks before stepping back to scan my outfit with a quick critical glance. "That sweater again, I sent you a Valentino blouse for Christmas. It'd be perfect tonight." I gave her a quick hug, feeling her stiffen slightly. "This is comfy, Mom, and I'm good," I replied, keeping my tone light. She sighed, muttering, "At least it's cashmere," before leading me toward the dining hall. Dad was deep in conversation with Uncle James by a towering fireplace, but he broke away when he saw me. Robert Brooks, tall and silver-haired, carried a quiet strength. Despite his wealth, his suit understated compared to Mom's flair. His hug was warm, smelling of cedar cologne. "Good to see you, kid," he said, studying my face. "You look worn out. That startup's still running you ragged." I admitted, "It's busy, Dad, but good busy." He nodded, his eyes catching something in my expression. "Saw your firm's name in a trade report. Big contract with a credit union. Not bad." I smiled, surprised he'd noticed. "Thanks, Dad. We're getting there." Before I could say more, Uncle James approached, martini in hand, his smile more polished than genuine. "Jennifer, you made it," he said, his tone carrying a faint, patronizing edge. "How's that little business venture holding up, still afloat in this economy?" Dad frowned slightly at his brother's jab, but I kept my cool. "Doing fine, Uncle James, thanks for asking." He patted my shoulder like I was a kid selling lemonade. "Persistence pays, I suppose. Ryan's killing it at the fund. Just led a merger that's netting us millions." I nodded politely. "That's great for Ryan." Aunt Heather joined us, her diamond earrings catching the light. "Jennifer, you should visit our new beach house in Chesapeake Bay," she said, her voice dripping with practiced warmth. "It's modest, but the views are to die for." I murmured something vague, already tuning out as more relatives gathered their chatter, a familiar hum of boasts about vacations and deals. The weight of David's watch steadied me, reminding me to stay focused on what mattered. A staff member announced dinner, and we moved toward the dining hall, a cavernous room with crystal chandeliers and a table set for 20. Dad walked beside me, his voice low. "You're quieter than usual. Everything okay?" I shrugged. "Just prepping for the usual show." He chuckled, but his eyes held concern. As we took our seats, Kayla's voice cut through the clink of glasses, her smirk aimed right at me. The air shifted, and I knew the real fireworks were about to start. As we settled into the dining hall, the table gleamed with crystal stemware and polished silver, the air heavy with the scent of seared steak and rosemary. The Brooks family dinner kicked off its usual script, relatives trading boasts, like currency, each story a bid for dominance. Ryan led the charge, casually mentioning his new Rolex Daytona, its bezel catching the chandelier's light as he waved his wrist. Picked it up after closing a $10 million deal, he said, smirking at Uncle James, who nodded proudly. Aunt Heather chimed in, describing their recent Chesapeake Bay beach house renovation, emphasizing the custom Italian tile that took months to source. Mom, ever the host, complimented their taste while subtly noting her own interior designer's work on the estate's new wing. Dad stayed quiet, sipping his wine, his eyes flickering between amusement and discomfort at the display. I ate my salad in silence, dodging the spotlight, but Kayla had other plans. She leaned forward, her diamond necklace glinting, and fixed her gaze on me. "So Jennifer's still taking the bus to that little office of yours?" she asked, her voice dripping with mockery. A few cousins chuckled. Uncle James raised an eyebrow, clearly enjoying the jab. The table's attention shifted, waiting for my response. I kept my fork steady, David's watch, a grounding weight on my wrist, and said calmly, "It gets me where I need to go, Kayla." She laughed sharply. "Come on, you're almost 30. Don't you ever get tired of slumming it with the commuters? Public transit in D.C. is a nightmare." The room tittered again, Mom looking embarrassed, Aunt Heather offering a pitying smile. I took a sip of water, ready to move on, but Mom's eyes suddenly locked on my wrist, her fork pausing midair. Her face froze, a mix of shock and recognition. "Jennifer," she said, her voice low, but cutting through the chatter, "that watch, where did you get it?" Every head turned. Kayla's smirk faltered, sensing the shift. I glanced down at the watch, its simple design betraying nothing of its value, and extended my arm slightly. "This just something I wear every day," I said, keeping my tone casual. Mom leaned closer, her eyes narrowing. "That's a David Lawson original, isn't it, from his limited collection?" The room went dead silent, glasses clinking to a stop. Dad looked up, confused but curious. Uncle James frowned, setting down his wine. "Lawson, the fintech billionaire who died a few years back?" he asked. Mom nodded, still staring. "He designed a small batch of watches before his first company took off. Only a handful exist. That's worth at least $8 million now, maybe more since his passing." A collective gasp rippled through the table. Kayla's mouth dropped open. Ryan's fork clattered against his plate. I shrugged, letting a small smile slip. "Oh, this piece of junk," I said, pulling my sleeve back to show it off. The room stayed frozen, all eyes on me. Dad broke the silence, his voice steady but intense. "How did you get that, Jennifer?" I took a breath, feeling David's lessons anchor me. "David Lawson gave it to me before he passed. He was my mentor, my first investor. He believed in what I was building when no one else did." Mom blinked, processing. "You knew David Lawson personally?" I nodded. "He guided me through my startup's early days, taught me what success really means. Not status, but impact." Uncle James leaned forward, his earlier condescension gone. "And what exactly are you building? You've always been cagey about this company of yours." The air tightened. I could feel Kayla's stare burning into me. It was time. "Lawson Finance Solutions," I said evenly. "We built a platform that uses algorithms to help regular people and small businesses manage finances against big players. Credit optimization, fraud detection, investment tracking. We started with underserved markets, but now we work with major banks, 2 healthcare networks, and just signed a federal contract for $900 million over 5 years. The silence was deafening. Aunt Heather coughed on her wine. Ryan stared like I'd spoken another language. Kayla's face twisted, caught between shock and something darker. Dad's eyes widened with a flicker of pride, but Mom looked stunned, her voice barely above a whisper. $900 million and your company. How much is it worth? I met her gaze directly. After our last funding round, $2.5 billion. I still own the majority. Uncle James choked on his steak, recovering with a forced laugh. $2.5 billion. And you're still riding the bus. Kayla's shock turned to a scowl. So you've been sitting on billions this whole time, acting broke to make us look bad. Her voice rose, drawing every eye. Is that why you never talk about it? Hiding so you can swoop in on Grandpa's estate when it's time to divide it? The accusation hit like a slap, sparking murmurs around the table. Grandpa's estate, a massive trust tied to Mom's real estate fortune, had been a sore point for years, with whispers of who'd get what. I kept my voice steady, though irritation flared. I don't care about the estate, Kayla. I haven't touched family money since college. My work stands on its own. She scoffed, undeterred. Right, so you can play humble while angling for the biggest share. That watch alone could buy half of DC, and you're pretending it's nothing. Mom looked torn, glancing between us, while Dad's jaw tightened, clearly displeased with Kayla's outburst. Uncle James jumped in, his tone now overly friendly. Now, Kayla, let's not jump to conclusions. Jennifer, that's an incredible achievement. Why keep it so quiet? His sudden warmth felt hollow, like he was already calculating how to leverage my success. Aunt Heather nodded vigorously. Exactly, dear. You should be proud. Imagine what you could do with a proper office, maybe a place in Georgetown. Ryan, still processing, muttered, $2.5 billion. That's bigger than Dad's fund. The shift was palpable. Their pitying glances turned to calculated interest, their earlier jabs replaced by awkward flattery. Mom reached for my hand, her voice soft but probing. But Jennifer, why live like this? That tiny apartment, the bus. You could have everything. I pulled my hand back gently, David's watch catching the light. I have what matters, Mom. David taught me success isn't about what you show off. It's about what you build and who you help. Our platforms saved thousands from financial ruin, streamlined healthcare billing, cut government waste. That's enough for me. Kayla rolled her eyes, her voice sharp. Oh, please spare us the saint act. You're sitting on billions and wearing a fortune, but we're supposed to believe you're above it all. Her words stung, but they also clarified something I'd ignored for too long. This family measured worth by what glittered, not what lasted. Dad spoke up, his tone firm. Kayla, that's enough. Jennifer's done something extraordinary. But Kayla doubled down, pointing at me. She's been lying to us, Dad, pretending to struggle while she's richer than all of us combined. And now she's got that watch. You know it'll tip the scales when Grandpa's trust gets split. The table erupted in whispers, relatives exchanging glances as the old estate feud reignited. Uncle James tried to steer the conversation, asking about my federal contract, but his eyes gleamed with opportunism. Aunt Heather suggested I meet her financial advisor, as if I needed one. Ryan asked about stock options, his tone too eager. The room felt suffocating, their newfound interest as shallow as their earlier scorn. I looked at Mom, hoping for a shred of understanding, but she just stared at the watch, murmuring, $8 million on your wrist, and you never said a word. The betrayal in her voice cut deep, but it also snapped something into focus. This wasn't about recognition. It was about control, about fitting me into their world of appearances. Kayla's accusations, the family's sudden pivot to flattery, the undercurrent of greed over Grandpa's trust, it all exposed a truth I couldn't unsee. David's watch felt heavier now, not just a reminder of his lessons, but a line between who I was and who they wanted me to be. As the dessert plates arrived untouched by the tension, I realized I was done trying to bridge that gap. The fireworks Kayla started had burned away any hope of connection, and my decision, final and unyielding, was closer than ever. As the dessert plate sat untouched, the dining hall's tension lingered like a storm that wouldn't break. The family's pivot was instant gone, were the smirks and pitying glances replaced by a cloying eagerness that felt worse. Uncle James leaned across the table, his smile too wide, asking about potential partnerships with my company, as if his hedge fund could ride my coattails. "Jennifer, we should talk. Your algorithms could complement our portfolio strategies," he said, his tone dripping with opportunism. Aunt Heather jumped in, suggesting I meet her charity board connections, her eyes gleaming with the prospect of bragging rights. Ryan, who'd barely spoken to me in years, suddenly wanted details on our stock structure, asking if I'd consider opening up shares for family. Even Mom, still reeling from the watch's reveal, pressed me about moving to a proper DC penthouse, her voice soft but insistent. "You deserve better than that shoebox apartment, darling. It's not fitting for someone of your status." Kayla, though, was the worst. She pulled back from her outburst but didn't apologize, instead, offering a forced smile and a half-hearted, "I didn't realize you were doing so well, Jen." "Good for you." Her words were hollow, her eyes still sharp with resentment over the estate feud she'd dragged into the open. The room buzzed with their newfound interest, but it was all surface. None of them cared about the platform's impact or David's philosophy. They saw dollar signs, not me. I sat there, David's watch heavy on my wrist, its quiet ticking a reminder of what I valued: work that mattered, integrity over flash. Their flattery felt like a cage trying to pull me into their world of appearances and control. I'd spent years dodging their judgment, but this sudden shift to adoration was just as toxic. I pushed my chair back, the scrape loud in the quiet room. "I'm done here," I said, my voice steady but firm. Mom's eyes widened. "Jennifer, what do you mean dinner's not over?" I looked at her, then at Kayla, Uncle James, and the rest, their faces a mix of confusion and calculation. "Not just dinner," I said. All of this. I'm not doing these gatherings anymore. I've built something real, and none of you get it. You never have." Kayla scoffed, but Dad reached out, his voice low. "Kid, don't do this. Let's talk." I shook my head, standing. "There's nothing to talk about, Dad. You measure me by what I don't show, and I'm tired of it." I walked out, their stunned silence following me through the foyer. Carlos caught my eye at the door, his nod subtle but understanding. I ordered an Uber, blocked their numbers on my phone before the car even arrived, and left the estate for good. Back in my apartment that night, I sat on my couch, David's watch in my palm, its weight grounding me. I'd learned something brutal, but clear, true success isn't about wealth or recognition. It's about living your values and making a difference, even if it means walking away from those who can't see it. David taught me that impact matters more than image, that building tools to save families from financial ruin outweighs any mansion or title. Cutting ties hurt Dad's quiet pride, Mom's misguided care, but staying would have meant betraying myself. This wasn't about revenge, it was about freedom. Choosing a life aligned with purpose over their shallow metrics was the hardest but truest decision I'd made. I want you to take this lesson to heart. Your worth isn't tied to what others see: your car, your clothes, your bank account. It's in what you create, who you lift up, and how you stay true to yourself. If your family or circle judges you by surface measures, ask yourself if they're worth your energy. Sometimes the bravest choice is to walk away from toxicity, to build a life that reflects your core, not their expectations. I learned that the hard way, and it freed me to focus on what David always championed: impact that lasts. Thank you all for listening to my story. It means more than you know to share it. If you've ever had to break free from judgment to live your truth, drop it in the comments. I read everyone. Hit like if this hit home, and subscribe for more stories about finding real value in a world obsessed with flash. Stay true out there.
I have an announcement to make, Andrew said, tapping his wine glass with a spoon. The conversation around my parents' crowded dinner table quieted as everyone turned toward my husband of 7 years. I watched his face carefully, noting the slight tremor in his hand, the way his eyes darted toward my sister Jenna, before settling somewhere above everyone's heads. My heart beat steadily, betraying none of the knowledge I'd been carrying for months. Vivien and I are getting divorced, he continued, his voice growing firmer. I hadn't planned to announce it this way, but since everyone's together... My mother gasped. Aunt Patricia placed a hand over her heart. My father's bushy eyebrows drew together in confusion. There's more, Andrew added, reaching across the table to take Jenna's hand. Jenna and I have fallen in love. We've been trying to fight it for years, but sometimes love chooses you. The shocked silence that followed was broken only by my mother's whispered, "Oh my God." All eyes turned to me, awaiting the inevitable breakdown, tears, screaming, perhaps the throwing of my mother's good china. Instead, I nodded calmly and said, "Please, everyone, check your emails right now." I'm Vivien Hayes, 32 years old, currently employed as a digital forensics specialist for a cybersecurity firm in Seattle. My job involves reconstructing digital evidence, tracking electronic footprints, and documenting digital patterns of behavior. I'm good at what I do, methodical, thorough, and patient. What I wanted was simple: a loving marriage built on honesty and mutual respect. Standing in my way were my husband Andrew and my younger sister Jenna, who had apparently decided that their happiness was worth sacrificing mine. The injustice wasn't just their affair, it was the elaborate deception that accompanied it. The lies told not just to me but to our entire family. The rewriting of our shared history to justify their betrayal. The assumption that I would play the role of blindsided victim in their carefully constructed narrative. Emails? Andrew asked, confusion flickering across his face. What emails? I sent them just before dinner, I replied, pulling out my own phone. Everyone should have received them by now. Around the table, family members hesitantly reached for their phones. My cousin David was the first to open his email, his eyes widening as he scrolled through the contents. My mother followed, her hand flying to her mouth as she gasped for the second time that evening. What have you done? Jenna hissed, her face paling as she grabbed her own phone. Andrew looked increasingly uneasy, glancing between me and his still unopened email. Vivien, whatever this is... It's just documentation, I said evenly. Something I'm particularly good at. As more family members opened their emails, the expressions around the table transformed from shock at the announcement to something darker: disapproval, anger, and disappointment directed not at me, but at Andrew and Jenna. What none of them realized yet was that the emails they were reading contained only a fraction of the evidence I had compiled. The full depth of the betrayal was far worse than anyone at this table, except perhaps Andrew and Jenna, could possibly imagine. Andrew and I met during a charity fundraiser for the Seattle Children's Hospital 8 years ago. He was a pediatric anesthesiologist, dedicated and compassionate. I was there representing my company, which had donated cybersecurity services to the hospital. Our connection was immediate and intense. Within a year, we were married in a small ceremony in my parents' backyard. Those early years were beautiful. We bought a craftsman bungalow in Queen Anne and spent weekends renovating it together. Andrew's work schedule was demanding, but he'd always make time for us. Surprise weekend getaways, cooking elaborate Sunday breakfasts, leaving little notes in my laptop bag. I'd never felt more secure or more loved. Jenna had always been the restless one in our family, dropping out of college twice, moving between cities, and changing careers with dizzying frequency. When she moved back to Seattle 3 years ago after another failed attempt at finding herself in Denver, I was the one who suggested she stay with us until she found her footing. Andrew was hesitant at first. "Are you sure? It might change our dynamic," he said. "She's my sister," I replied. "Family helps family." What was meant to be a 2-month stay stretched into 6. Jenna quickly found a job at a local art gallery, but claimed she couldn't afford Seattle's rental prices. I didn't mind. I'd always wanted to be closer to my sister, and her presence seemed to fill a gap I hadn't realized existed in our home. Looking back, I see the warning signs I missed. How Andrew began working later shifts, how Jenna would run errands that took hours longer than they should have, how they developed inside jokes I wasn't part of, the occasional tension that would fill a room when I entered, as if I'd interrupted something. "You two seem to get along well," my mother commented during a family barbecue, watching Andrew help Jenna set up a badminton net. "Why wouldn't they?" I'd replied, genuinely puzzled. Mom shrugged. "Some men don't get along with their in-laws, you're lucky." I was lucky, I thought. My husband and sister had become friends. Our house felt more alive with Jenna's energy. If Andrew sometimes seemed distant, I attributed it to work stress. If Jenna occasionally watched him with a strange intensity, I dismissed it as my imagination. Even after Jenna finally moved into her own apartment, she remained a constant presence in our lives. Sunday dinners, impromptu movie nights, calls for help with household repairs that apparently couldn't wait until I got home from work. "You're too trusting," my friend Heather told me once after witnessing Jenna call Andrew for the 3rd time during our lunch. "I wouldn't let my sister get that comfortable with my husband." I had laughed it off. Jenna's just needy. Besides, it's Andrew. The implication was clear. Andrew would never betray me. He was too honest, too devoted, too good. If I occasionally caught him looking at an incoming text and quickly putting his phone away, I told myself not to be paranoid. If he and Jenna sometimes fell silent when I entered a room, I assured myself it was coincidence. Trust, after all, was the foundation of our marriage. The discovery came by accident, as these things often do. 6 months ago, I was using Andrew's laptop to order takeout while he was at work. When I opened the browser, it automatically restored his previous session, including his email. I wasn't looking for anything. I had no suspicions compelling me to snoop. But there it was, a series of messages between Andrew and Jenna, explicit and unambiguous. "Last night was amazing," Jenna had written. "I can't stop thinking about you." "We need to be more careful," Andrew replied. "I don't want to hurt Viv." I read through the entire thread with a strange detachment, as if I were examining evidence for a case at work rather than witnessing the collapse of my marriage. The emails stretched back over 2 years, 2 years of deception, carrying on right under my nose. I closed the laptop without ordering dinner. When Andrew came home that night, I searched his face for signs of the stranger I'd discovered. Some indication that the man who kissed my forehead and asked about my day was the same one who had written those messages to my sister. But he looked exactly the same. "You okay?" he asked, noticing my quietness. "Rough day at work?" "Just tired," I replied, watching him carefully. How easily the lie came to him, how comfortably he moved through our home, our life, while maintaining this secret. Over the next few days, I found myself oscillating between numbness and devastating pain. I would wake up at 3 a.m., heart racing, wondering how I had missed the signs. During daylight hours, I functioned on autopilot, going to work, making dinner, engaging in conversations that now felt scripted and hollow. I didn't confront them immediately. A part of me hoped there was an explanation, something that would make sense of the incomprehensible. Perhaps the emails were just fantasy, never acted upon. Perhaps Andrew had been manipulated somehow. Perhaps I had misunderstood the context. But professional habits die hard. I began documenting, almost unconsciously at first. I noted when Andrew claimed to be working late, but his location showed elsewhere. I logged accidental encounters between him and Jenna that seemed too frequent to be coincidence. I matched credit card statements with hotel bookings and restaurant charges. The evidence mounted, irrefutable and heartbreaking. Not only were they having an affair, but they were extraordinarily careless about it, as if they didn't expect me to notice, or perhaps didn't care if I did. 2 weeks after my initial discovery, I found myself sitting in my car outside an upscale hotel downtown, watching Andrew and Jenna enter together. They were laughing, his hand resting intimately on the small of her back. I took photos mechanically, adding them to my growing file. That night, Andrew came home late, claiming an emergency surgery had kept him at the hospital. I nodded, served him reheated dinner, and listened to his elaborate fiction about a child with a ruptured appendix. "You look exhausted," I said, studying the faint smudge of lipstick on his collar, Jenna's shade. "It was intense," he agreed, reaching for my hand across the table. "But I'm home now." The tenderness of the gesture nearly broke me. In that moment, I realized I was living with a perfect stranger, someone capable of looking me in the eye while constructing an alternate reality. The man I had married, the sister I had grown up with, neither existed as I had believed. I withdrew my hand gently. "You should get some rest." That night, as Andrew slept beside me, I made my decision. I wouldn't confront them yet. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of my tears or rage. I would continue gathering evidence, building my case methodically and thoroughly. And when the time came to reveal what I knew, it wouldn't be in private, where they could manage the narrative. It would be public, irrefutable, and completely on my terms. For the next 2 months, I lived a double life. During the day, I was Vivien Hayes, devoted wife and loving sister. I attended family gatherings, maintained our home, and continued the routines of our marriage with robotic precision. At night, I became a detective in my own life, meticulously documenting the web of lies that surrounded me. The more I uncovered, the more elaborate their deception proved to be. They had created a shared digital calendar with coded entries to coordinate their meetings. They had a joint credit card I never knew about, used exclusively for their rendezvous. They had even discussed future plans, vacations they would take, a house they hoped to buy, once they figured out the Vivien situation. My first attempt at confrontation came after 3 months of surveillance. I approached it strategically, choosing a moment when Andrew was vulnerable, tired after a long shift, slightly mellowed by a glass of wine. "I think we should talk about Jenna," I said casually as we sat on the porch swing one evening. His body tensed infinitesimally. "What about her?" "I've noticed you two seem close." Andrew laughed, the sound slightly forced. "She's your sister. Of course we're close." "No, I mean really close, Andrew." I held his gaze steadily. "Is there something you want to tell me?" For a moment, I thought he might confess. Something flickered in his eyes, recognition, perhaps even guilt. Then his expression hardened. "I don't know what you're suggesting, but I don't appreciate it," he said coolly. "Jenna is family. If you're feeling insecure about something, that's on you." The swift denial and redirection, casting me as the irrational, jealous wife, was so smooth it almost made me doubt my own evidence. Almost. My next approach was more direct. I left browser windows open to hotel confirmations, placed my documented timeline where he might accidentally discover it. Each time, Andrew found ways to explain away the evidence or simply ignored it completely. Meanwhile, Jenna launched her own counteroffensive. She began calling me more frequently, suggesting sister activities with artificial enthusiasm. She introduced me to single men at gallery events, commenting how "Andrew and I both think you work too much. You should date more." The casual cruelty of trying to set me up while sleeping with my husband was breathtaking. The most painful revelation came from my mother, who innocently mentioned that Jenna had been helping Andrew plan something special for your anniversary. She's been so secretive about it, Mom said. But she mentioned they've been working on the surprise for months. Our anniversary was still 4 months away. The idea that they were using it as cover for their meetings, involving my own mother in their fiction, crystallized something inside me. This wasn't just an affair. It was a systematic campaign to manipulate everyone around us. I decided to force the issue. One evening, I deliberately left evidence of their affair, hotel receipts, screenshots of their messages, on the kitchen counter where Andrew would find them. When he came home, I waited in the living room, prepared for the confrontation that would finally bring everything into the open. Hours passed. Finally, Andrew entered, his expression grave. "We need to talk," he said, sitting across from me. "Yes, we do," I agreed, feeling a strange sense of relief that the charade was ending. "I found something disturbing," he continued, placing a folder on the coffee table between us. I reached for it, expecting to see the evidence I had left for him. Instead, I found printed emails between me and a colleague from work, innocent messages discussing a project, edited to appear romantic and incriminating. "I know about David," Andrew said, his voice tight with manufactured pain. "How long has this been going on?" The moment was so surreal I almost laughed. He had fabricated evidence of an affair to accuse me, a perfect distraction from his own betrayal. "There's nothing going on with David," I said calmly. "Those messages are about work, and you know it." "They seem pretty intimate to me," he countered. "All those late nights at the office, it makes sense now." I realized with startling clarity that he wasn't just deflecting. He was setting up his justification, creating a narrative where my imagined infidelity had driven him into Jenna's arms. The calculated nature of it chilled me to the bone. "I think we should take some time apart," he said, reaching for my hand with practiced concern. "This isn't healthy for either of us." In that moment, I understood. Direct confrontation would never work. Andrew and Jenna had invested too much in their version of reality. They would deny, deflect, and distort the truth until their fiction became the accepted narrative. Time apart might be good, I agreed, watching relief flood his features. He hadn't expected me to concede so easily. "I'm glad you understand," he said, squeezing my hand. "This isn't about blame. Sometimes people just grow apart." His practiced sympathy was almost admirable. I wondered how many times he'd rehearsed this conversation with Jenna, perfecting his concerned expression in her bathroom mirror. "Nah, I'll stay with Jenna while we figure things out," he continued. "She offered her guest room when I told her about the situation." Of course she had. I nodded, playing my assigned role in their script while mentally shifting to a new phase of my investigation. If Andrew thought my acquiescence meant surrender, he was gravely mistaken. The following week, as Andrew moved some of his things to Jenna's apartment, I took a personal day from work. While they believed I was at the office, I visited a private investigator recommended by a colleague. Douglas Parker specialized in infidelity cases and had testified in hundreds of divorce proceedings. "I'm not looking to hire you," I explained, spreading my evidence across his desk. "I need a professional assessment of what I've gathered and advice on what else I might need." Douglas reviewed my documentation with impressed surprise. "Most clients come to me with suspicions. You've brought a complete case file." "It's what I do for a living," I replied. "Just not usually in my personal life." He confirmed what I already suspected. My evidence was compelling, but could potentially be explained away in isolation. He recommended additional documentation, financial records showing patterns of deception, witness statements from hotel staff, and most importantly, evidence of their intent to mislead rather than just the affair itself. "Intent is powerful in divorce proceedings," he advised. "If you can prove they deliberately plan to deceive you and others, it strengthens your position considerably." I left his office with renewed purpose and a list of resources. Over the next month, I expanded my investigation beyond just documenting the affair. I uncovered financial deceptions I hadn't previously detected. Andrew had been diverting money from our joint savings to a private account for nearly a year. Jenna had charged expenses to my credit card on multiple occasions when I had loaned it to her for emergencies. The most stunning discovery came through Andrew's cloud storage, which automatically backed up his text messages. I found conversations between him and Jenna discussing me in cruel, dismissive terms, mocking my trust, planning how they would present their relationship to our family after the inevitable divorce. "She's so caught up in her work, she hasn't noticed a thing," Andrew had written. "We could probably have sex on the kitchen counter while she's typing away in the next room." "She'll probably thank us for making the decision for her," Jenna replied. "She never really knew how to be a proper wife anyway." Reading their casual cruelty transformed something within me. The numbness that had protected me gave way to a cold, clarifying anger. This wasn't just betrayal. It was systematic emotional abuse, a coordinated effort to undermine my reality while preserving their self-image. I began preparing for the endgame. Divorce was inevitable, but it would happen on my terms, not theirs. I consulted with Diana Wright, the most respected divorce attorney in Seattle, who reviewed my evidence with clinical precision. "This is exceptional documentation," she said. "Most clients bring me tissues and accusations. You've brought receipts, literal and figurative." "What should I expect?" I asked. "With what you've provided. A favorable settlement, certainly, but Washington is a no-fault state. The courts won't punish them for the affair itself." "I'm not looking for legal punishment," I clarified. "I want the truth recognized. I want their narrative dismantled." Diana studied me thoughtfully. "The court of public opinion can be more punishing than any legal judgment. If that's your aim, you need to consider carefully how and when you present this evidence." Her words crystallized my approach. Andrew and Jenna had orchestrated a public fiction. The appropriate response was public truth, delivered in a way they couldn't control or rewrite. As I left Diana's office, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Family dinner at our house this Sunday, your father's birthday. Andrew and Jenna both confirmed. Please come, don't make it awkward." The perfect stage had presented itself. All the players would be gathered, expecting to manage the narrative of my failing marriage and their blossoming love. They had no idea I was no longer following their script. I spent the next 3 days meticulously preparing my presentation. Each email was tailored to its recipient, containing only the information relevant to them. For my father, evidence of how Andrew had borrowed money from him, while simultaneously diverting funds to his secret account. For my mother, proof of how Jenna had used her to establish alibis. For my aunts and cousins, documentation of the specific lies told to each of them. The final touch was a master email to myself that contained everything: the complete timeline, all evidence, and a detailed account of my discovery process. This would be my reference during the inevitable chaos that would follow my revelation. On Sunday morning, I woke with strange serenity. I dressed carefully in a simple blue dress that Andrew had always complimented. I styled my hair, applied light makeup, and adorned myself with the pearl earrings my grandmother had left me, a talisman of her strength that I desperately needed. As I prepared to leave, my phone chimed with a text from Jenna. "Just checking you're coming tonight. Dad would be heartbroken if you didn't show. We're all family, after all." The casual audacity nearly broke my composure. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that in a few hours, their fiction would collapse under the weight of irrefutable evidence. I arrived at my parents' home precisely on time, bearing a homemade cake and a carefully wrapped gift for my father. The familiar sounds of family gathering enveloped me as I stepped inside. Laughter from the living room, the clatter of dishes in the kitchen, the low murmur of sports commentary from the television. Andrew and Jenna were already there, seated side by side on the sofa. They had maintained a pretense of casual friendship in family settings, but now, with the truth of their relationship about to be unveiled, they sat slightly closer than before, testing the waters of their public couplehood. "Vivien," My mother greeted me with a tight hug. "I'm so glad you came. This means so much to your father." I returned her embrace, breathing in her familiar perfume, wondering how she would look at me after reading my email, if she would recognize the strength it had taken to endure these months of deception. The dinner proceeded with excruciating normalcy. We ate my mother's pot roast and discussed safe topics: the weather, my cousin's new baby, my father's retirement plans. I participated mechanically, watching Andrew and Jenna exchange glances across the table, clearly anticipating the moment they had planned. As dessert was served, Andrew cleared his throat and tapped his glass. I felt a chill of déjà vu, recognizing the gesture from countless family gatherings when he'd made announcements: job promotions, our engagement, the purchase of our home. Moments that had once filled me with pride now revealed as steps in a relationship built on quicksand. What I hadn't anticipated was a last-minute complication. Just as Andrew began to speak, my phone buzzed with an alert from my email scheduling system. Delivery failed, server error. A quick check confirmed my worst fear. The carefully timed emails had not been sent. While Andrew launched into his prepared speech about difficult decisions and unexpected love, I frantically tried to resend the emails. The server response was clear: temporary outage, estimated recovery time unknown. I felt a moment of pure panic. My entire plan hinged on those emails arriving simultaneously with Andrew's announcement. Without them, I would indeed be cast as the blindsided, pitiful wife they expected me to be. Andrew was reaching the climax of his speech, his hand now openly holding Jenna's. My family watched with expressions ranging from shock to discomfort to pity, exactly the reaction they had anticipated. I had seconds to decide: walk out in apparent defeat, confront them without my evidence. Neither option was acceptable. As Andrew uttered the words, "Jenna and I have fallen in love," I realized there was a third option. I had brought my laptop as backup. All the evidence was there, organized and ready. With calm determination, I opened it under the table and navigated to my email program. As Andrew finished speaking and all eyes turned expectantly toward me, I pressed send on a single email to everyone present, with all attachments included. "Please, everyone," I said into the stunned silence, "check your emails right now." The choreography of the next few moments was almost beautiful in its precision. Phones chimed in succession around the table as my email arrived. Confused glances were exchanged before, one by one, family members opened the message. "I've prepared some additional context for Andrew's announcement," I explained calmly, watching Andrew's confident smile falter. "Just some documentation I thought everyone should have." My father was the first to react, his face darkening as he scrolled through his phone. My cousin David whispered, "Holy shit," under his breath. My mother set her phone down with trembling hands, looking between Jenna and me with dawning horror. "What is this?" Andrew demanded, reaching for his own phone. "It's the truth," I replied simply. "Everything I've discovered over the past 6 months, organized for clarity, hotel receipts, text messages, financial records, the complete history of your relationship with my sister." Jenna lunged for her phone, her face draining of color as she opened the email. "These are private conversations. You had no right—" "They're conversations about me," I corrected. "About how to deceive me. About how pathetic and oblivious I am. I particularly enjoyed the exchange where you discussed whether to tell me before or after Christmas, and decided that ruining her holiday would be cruel." Andrew was frantically scrolling through the evidence, his planned narrative of star-crossed lovers disintegrating with each swipe. "This is invasion of privacy," he sputtered. "You can't just—" "Actually, I can," I interrupted. "Washington is a one-party consent state for recordings. Our shared accounts were, well, shared. And most of this information was gathered from devices and accounts you left open, often in our home." The room had fallen into stunned silence, broken only by the occasional gasp as someone reached a particularly damning piece of evidence. "You plan to announce this tonight," I continued, my voice steady. You choreographed this moment to control the narrative. The reluctant lovers, the difficult decision, the clean break. You just didn't expect me to have a narrative of my own. My mother found her voice first. Jenna, how could you do this to your sister? It was happening, the shift in perception I had worked for months to achieve. The rewriting of their carefully constructed fiction. Andrew attempted damage control, his doctor's authority surfacing as he tried to regain command of the situation. This is clearly Vivien's way of processing a difficult transition, he said, adopting a clinical tone. She's created this elaborate... Stop talking, Andrew, my father interrupted, his voice ice-cold. My daughter doesn't fabricate evidence. It's her literal profession. Jenna shifted to tears, her go-to strategy when confronted. I never meant to hurt anyone, she sobbed. It just happened. You can't control who you fall in love with. According to your texts, my cousin David interjected, holding up his phone, you've been planning this for over 2 years. That's not just happening. The chorus of condemnation grew as more family members processed what they were reading. Aunt Patricia was comforting my mother, who couldn't stop staring at Jenna as if seeing a stranger. Uncle James was asking Andrew pointed questions about financial discrepancies mentioned in the emails. I remained silent, watching the natural consequences unfold. After months of documentation, analysis, and preparation, there was nothing more I needed to say. The evidence spoke for itself, clear and irrefutable. I gathered my purse and stood. I should go, I said quietly. Dad, I'm sorry about your birthday dinner. My father stood immediately. I'll walk you out. Outside, he hugged me fiercely. I had no idea what you've been going through, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Why didn't you tell us sooner? I needed to understand it first, I explained, and I needed everyone else to understand it too, not just believe me. As I drove away, my phone lit up with messages from family members, expressions of support, shock, and solidarity. I turned it off, welcoming the silence. The next morning, I filed for divorce. Andrew and Jenna's attempts to control the narrative had collapsed completely, not through dramatic confrontation, but through the methodical presentation of truth. 3 months later, as I signed the final divorce papers, my lawyer asked if I felt satisfied with the outcome. I don't feel satisfaction, I replied honestly, just clarity. I had built a career uncovering digital evidence of human behavior. I never imagined my greatest case would be documenting my own unraveling marriage. But professionals use the tools they have, and in the end, methodical documentation had accomplished what emotional confrontation never could. It had replaced deception with truth. That evening, I packed the last of my belongings and moved into my new apartment overlooking Puget Sound. As the sun set over the water, I deleted the investigation files from my computer, the final step in a process that had consumed nearly a year of my life. Tomorrow would be the first page of a new chapter, one written entirely in my own hand.